I don't usually work with a Mac, so this is a little different. So this pediatric lupus project, so this was a project I started as a fellow, and 3 other fellows have sort of added on to it. So that's another nice thing about this is, once you build a database, people can add on to it. And you can also copy it. So say another investigator comes along, and we had this happen in our department, where they wanted a lot of my data, but they wanted to change some definitions, and they wanted to make alterations to the database. And so they just copied my database, and then made their alterations, and now they have their own database. So that's another thing you can do. So if you have a project that's similar to somebody else's project, you can ask them to copy their database. So what else on the lupus project? So here's some more. Scroll down.
Sorry. It's a 2-finger thing.
Oh, 2 fingers, huh. Okay, so then here's a bunch of reports that I have here. So I did this practice one for you guys. So again, is this patient in the study? So it's very good in your databases to actually have a field in there. Is this patient included in the study? And in this case, this lupus database, since we expanded into 3 or 4 other projects, we actually have questions. Is the patient included in the ethnicity study? Is the patient included in the fungal study? Is the patient included in the AVN study? And then that way, the person that's doing the AVN study can say, please, or make a report, say, I want all the patients that are in my study. So, and then that's also important for, downloading the data into a statistical analysis program. You don't want to download the data from another study. You just want the patients that are pertaining to your study. So what are some other...
So that is a common theme, that if you work in a big lab, you have sort of a cohort of patients that have like a disorder, and you're doing a number of studies based on them to create one project that holds sort of the consistent information about that cohort, and then for each particular study, create a child project that just links back to that main project. Well, this is patient 55. And then you don't need to re-enter all their demographic information, their date of birth, all that other stuff. You keep that in the main one, and that way you don't, repeat and do this multiple data entry.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, as a fellow, I built the demographics, the baseline lupus, and then another fellow came along and created this vasculopathy score that she was testing on certain outcomes. And then both of us sort of added in various treatment sort of fields, and then we had the outcomes fields. So anyways, it was very helpful to sort of keep all of these forms within the same database. And I don't know if you've used this database a long time ago. It was actually very time consuming to toggle between each of these pages of your data entry form, so between these forms. And now it's much faster. So in the past, I used to not break up my my database into different forms because it just took so long between. But now you should break it up as much as possible, because when you're going through a patient's chart, you might have one piece of data that you want to quickly go to this form, and then you might want to go back to another form. In the past, we often used paper to keep track of the data we were collecting, but we're more and more trying to just go from collecting the data in the chart directly to the REDCap data. So by having different forms, it makes it faster to find the field. Yeah, so let's go back here. So this LSV study, so this is a head ultrasound finding. So one interesting thing that I did with Stride is I actually had them give me all of the patient medical record numbers that had this ultrasound finding. And then I had them find controls. So basically age-matched kids that had head ultrasounds but didn't have that finding. And then I had them load them all up into the data review tool. And then we loaded up all of those medical record numbers, medical record numbers. Because if you're using the data review tool, you need to know what the medical records are. So we put them all into our REDCap database, but then I blinded my data collector. So he didn't know which of the patients in this big cohort had the head ultrasound finding. And that's very nice because, as you know, there's a lot of bias. So if you believe in your hypothesis, you're going to look harder for certain things. when you know what the outcome is. So by not informing the data collector on which patients had the finding, they could do it blindly. And then they had a list of search terms that they were using to go through and collect data. And on that list of search terms, I excluded the search terms for this particular head ultrasound finding. So that's something you might want to think about instead of breaking up into controls and your cases. Just keep them all in one file. And then the last thing I just wanted to show you, so the longitudinal data. So here, so you mentioned that you can keep them all in the same database. So when we built this, it wasn't possible. This is when it first came out. So we had our pediatric lupus project, and then we had another fellow come along and wanted to add a longitudinal component to it. So this was that particular database. And you can kind of see, here's the dashboards. This record status dashboard is basically kind of looking at all of the, oh wait, whoops, sorry, I can't show that to you. Sorry. Close your eyes, it has patient information. Anyways, I can't show that to you, but that's longitudinal data, and we had to keep it as a separate, so I don't know if that's...
There's a lot of things that, there are new features that come out every couple months when we release it. So if you have a really old project that was really painful, it might have been fixed, feel free to come in.
Yeah, so we had it as a separate database, but it was still linked by the study ID number. So I don't know, unfortunately, a lot of these have patient information, so I can't show you too many details, but do you have any questions for me as someone that was a user? Yeah.
For the situation where you blinded your doing data entry, did you do that by masking that field as PHI and then not giving them permission?
So they were blinded in the data collection phase. So they would go into the data review tool. Have you used the data review tool?
No.
Oh, okay, so this is great. This is a database that basically contains all of the typed records from a patient chart. And then there's a search field. So for example, I would say, okay, like there's a whole bunch of questions, but one of the questions is, did this baby have hypotonia? So they type hypotonia in the search field, and then anywhere in the chart that the word hypotonia shows up, then they would say, okay, yes, the patient had hypotonia. But what I did was they were blinded because I told them they cannot search on the terms for the lenticular striate vasculopathy.
Yeah, that's one. In REDCap, if you wish to hide certain fields from some users, they don't have field level permissions. There's a couple ways you can kind of do it, but there are some tricky nuances. So if you want to do that, I recommend you come and see me, because you have to make sure that they don't have access to certain combinations of features that might allow them to see a field that you intend to hide from them. You can make it hard pretty easily. To make it foolproof is almost impossible. So if you really want to do that, what we sometimes do is break it into two projects, have the PHI that's sensitive in one project, and then have the other stuff in another project, and that user just doesn't have access to that at all. But when you do data analysis, you can pull them both and link them together.
And one other thing to keep in mind when you're building databases is that the person entering data should always enter something. And there's always going to be situations where they're not sure what to enter. So, for example, I don't know, okay, the hypotonia, maybe there are some conflicting records in the baby's chart as to whether they had hypotonia or not. So you should have the answer, yes, they had hypotonia, no, they didn't have hypotonia, or unsure. And then that's different than just a blank field, because ultimately all the blank fields are missing data that you'd want to go back and kind of search for that. So maybe somebody inadvertently skipped that question. So there should always be a field that, something in the field that they answer. And then a lot of times, so sometimes there is missing data. So for the lupus study, we order, double-stranded DNA on all our lupus patients. But maybe there was a patient that I couldn't find the double-stranded DNA result because maybe they got it at Kaiser and somehow it just never got recorded in the system. Well, that would be missing data, and that would be, and so for missing data, we frequently use the number 99999, and that always indicates missing data. And that way, when you look at your Excel spreadsheet or when you'll always know that 99999 means missing data. Any other questions?
Anything else before I release all of your email addresses? spam engines, magazine subscriptions.
Thanks so much. You have refreshments outside.
Thank you.
I didn't realize your wife was a doctor.
Yeah. Marina Martin,
What, on the adult side?
geriatrics.
Oh, okay.